Hi guys, stay with me. Picture this. It is April 2020. You have just lost your job. Your restaurant closed. Your construction site shut down. Your salon, your gym, your office all gone overnight. You have a family to feed, rent due in 2 weeks, and no idea when any of this ends. So you do what you are supposed to do. You go online, you file for unemployment, you wait for the government to send the money you paid into for years, but the money never comes. Not because the system ran out, not because you did anything wrong, because someone on the other side of the world, or maybe just across the town, had already filed a claim in your name with your social security number, with your identity, purchased it for $12 on the dark web, and they had already collected your check. This is not a hypothetical. This happened in hundreds of thousands of real Americans while they were losing everything. Criminal networks, organized, sophisticated, and completely prepared, were running the largest unemployment fraud operation in United States history. $100 billion stolen in under 18 months. And as of today, most of the people who took it will never be caught. This is how it happened. You know, to understand how $100 billion disappeared, you need to understand what American looked like in the spring of 2020 and the impossible decision that government had to make. On March 13, 2020, President Trump declared a national emergency within days. The economy entered free fall in the final 2 weeks of March alone. Nearly 10 million Americans filed for unemployment, a number so staggering that state unemployment offices built to hold handle tens of thousands of claims a week simply could not process it. In a normal times, filing for unemployment involves forms, waiting periods, documentation requirements, identify verification, sometimes an in-person visit. It was slow, it was bureaucratic, but it was designed that way for a reason, to verify that the money was going to the right people or not. None of that was possible anymore. On March 27, 2020, Congress passes the CARES Act, a $2 trillion emergency relief package, passed in a day, signed into a law with nearly unanimous bipartisan support. Inside it was program called Pandemic Unemployment Assistance and PUA. It was expanded unemployment eligibility to cover workers, freelancers, and the self-employment employed for the very first time. These were workers who had never been part of the unemployment system before, which meant there was no existent data on them, no employer records to cross reference, no wage history to verify, and to get money or fast to keep families from collapsing right now. The Department of Labor allowed states to self certify eligibility. You could file a claim by simply stating that you are unemployed due to COVID. No documentation required, no employer verification, no waiting period is most states. A name, a social security number, a bank account. That will all it took. And within the days of the decision being made, criminal networks around the world knew exactly what it meant. The vault was open. This was not a crime of opportunity. This was a crime of preparation. The dark web had been selling stolen American identities for years. You know, social security number, dates of birth, addresses, even previous employment history, sold in bulk packages called fudge. Fulge, a complete identity profile for real American citizen, could be purchased for as little as $8 to $15. Fraud rings has been buying and stockpiling their identities for months before the pandemic. When PUA launched, they were ready. The operation worked like an assembly line. Criminals would load stolen identity data into automated scripts, software tools that could submit hundreds of unemployment applications per hour across multiple states simultaneously. They used VPNs and residential IP addresses to appear local to the states they were targeting. They set up thousands of prepared debit cards and bank accounts, often in the names of unwaiting money mules, to receive the payments. Some rings were filing a thousand fraudulent applications per day. The scale of what followed was unlike anything investigators have been seen. The Secret Service, which handles financial crime, later described it as the most significant fraud against a government program in American history. Here are just a few of the documented cases. A fraud ring operating out of Los Angeles submitted over 800 fraudulent PUA claims in a single week, collecting hundreds of thousands of dollars before being identified. In Florida, investigators discovered that hundreds of unemployment claims being processed were filed using a social security numbers of prison inmates, people who were clearly not unemployed because they were incarcerated. Many of the claims has been approved automatically. In Washington state, one of the first and hardest hit states, the Department of Employed Security later admitted that over 650 million in fraudulent payments has gone out before they even realized something was wrong. We already discussed this topic earlier. The state has been so overwhelmed by these volumes of claims, the fraud alerts were going unreviewed for weeks. And in perhaps the most extraordinary single case, a man in Seattle who was serving a prison sentence for first degree murder successfully collected over $1 million in fraudulent unemployment benefits across 17 different states from inside his prison cell. By mid 2021, federal investigators has identified at least 40 foreign criminal organizations specifically targeting US pandemic relief program, Nigerian fraud rings, Chinese cybercrime network, Eastern European organized crime groups, all of them running sophisticated multi-state operations, all of them moving money out of the country within days of receiving it. Within 18 months of PUA launching it, the Department of Labor Inspector General put the fraud estimated of $60 billion. Then it is was revised upward to 80 billion. By 2023, the official figure had settled at over 100 billion dollars. Let me give you a reference point of that number. 100 billion dollars is more than the United States spends on the entire federal highway system in a year. It is more than the combined annual budgets of the FBI, the DEA, and the Secret Services multiplied by 4. It is gone. On the other part, the partner are rarely makes the news. It was happened to the real people whose identities were used. Considered what it means to have your identity stolen for an unemployment claim. The fraudster files a claim in your name. The state processes it, approves it, and marks your social security number as having an active unemployment claim. When the real you, try to file your own legitimate claim. Weeks later, the system flags a conflict. Your claim is frozen pending investigations. You receive no money while it is resolved. In 2020 and 2021, resolving that kind of dispute could take months. Unemployment officers was receiving millions of calls a day. Wait times were measured in hours when the calls connected to all. In some states, the fraud reporting hotline simply rang endlessly with no answer. There are real documented cases of people waiting 6 months to receive their first unemployment payment because a criminal had used their identity first. James, a former hotel worker in Nevada, lost his job in March 2020. He filed immediately. When he finally got through to his state's unemployment office, 3 months later, he was told that someone had already collected benefits in his name and that his case was under review. He did not receive his first legitimate payment until September 2020, 6 months with a wife, 2 children, and rent accumulating unpaid. Teresa, a freelancer graphic designer in Chicago, never received a single dollar from PUA. A fraudster had used her identity. The money went to a prepaid card in other state, and by the time she reported it, the appeals process took so long that the program had ended before her case was resolved. She was told she was no longer eligible. Her window has expired. The system moved fast enough to pay fraudster within days. It moved slowly enough that reveals victim fell through the cracks entirely. And to this day, many of the other those victims has never been compensated. When a crime has been a crime, you know, when a crime of this scale happens, the natural question is who is the blame. The honest answer is almost impossible to assign, and that distribution may not be entirely accidental. The states bear primarily operational responsibility. They ran the unemployment systems. They made the day-to-day discussions about verifications, requirements, and fraud controls, and many of them either because they were overwhelmed, understaffed, or operating in technology that was genuinely decades out of date, failed catastrophically. California alone lost an estimated $32 billion to pandemic unemployment fraud, more than the individual GDP of some small countries. The state's employment development department was so dysfunctional during this period that it was one inspector general issued an emergency report describing it is has having essentially no effective fraud prevention in place. But the federal government cannot escape responsibility either. The Department of Labor issued guidance that explicitly encouraged states to spend up processing and minimizing documentation barriers. Internal communication letter obtained through congressional inquiries showed that federal officials were warned before PUA launched. The relaxed verification requirements would create a significant fraud vulnerability. The processed anyway. The potential imperative to be seen helping American immediately was too powerful. There is also a questioning of technology. The federal government has known for years the state unemployment systems are dangerously outdated. A 2020 report by the National Association of State Workforce Agencies has explicitly warning that aging infrastructure would be catastrophically ill equipment to the handle a surge in a claims. The report was published before COVID. No significant federal investment in modernization these systems has been made. And then there is a Congress. Oversight hearing have been held. Inspector General has testified. Reports running hundreds of pages have been published, and the legislative response have been by any responsible measures inadequate to the scale of what happened, partly because the politics are genuinely complicated. Both parties voted for the CARE Act. Both parties pushed for fast disbursement, and neither party wants to warn the consequences. And partly because in Washington, the political cost of inaction is almost always lower than the political cost of admitting what went wrong. And the Department of Justice has charged approximately 3,000 individuals in connection with COVID relief fund. Several high-profile prosecutions has resulted in significant prison sentences, and the Secret Service and IRS Criminal Investigation Divisions has both reported recovering several $1 billion in fraudulent funds. But let us be honest about what that means. 3,000 arrests against a fraud operation in the involved hundreds of thousands of individual fraudulent claims, 40 identified foreign criminal organizations, and $100 billion in losses. The recovers, while real, represent less than 5 cents on every dollar stolen. The reason most preparators will never catch come down to the several compounding factors. First, international jurisdiction. The majority of the largest, most sophisticated fraud rings operated from outside the United States. They routed money through layers of financial intermediaries across multiple countries before it were reached a final destination. Tracing and prosecuting that chain requires the cooperation of foreign governments, cooperation that is slow, expensive, politically complicated, and frequently unavailable. Second, the speed of the crime. Fraudulent unemployment payments were often deposited onto prepaid debit cards and withdrawn in cash within 24 to 48 hours of arrival. By the time fraud was flagged, the money has already moved. In many cases, it had already left the country. Third, prosecutional resources. The DOJ, the Secret Service, and the IRS Criminal Investigation Division are all operating with finite staff and budgets. Pursuing international organized crime cases is extraordinary resource intensive, require years of investigation, significant foreign accounting, and complex goal coordination. Small time domestic fraudsters are eraser to catch and prosecute. The kingpins of these operations are, in most cases, simply out of reach. And fourth, perhaps most importantly, there is no longer the same political urgency to pursue it. The pandemic is over. The new cycle has moved. Funding for COVID fraud task force has been cut. The federal structure of legitimation on some pandemic fraud charges began running in 2020, meaning that for some categories of crime, the window of prosecution is already closing. The money is gone. Most of the people who took it are gone, and the political wills to spend your years and hundreds of millions of dollars chasing them has largely evaporated. You know what? Here is what I want to leave you with: not the fraud, not the criminals, not even in the incompetence. I want you to think about what not done and what it could have been. After the 2008 financial crisis, federal investigators identified widespread mortgage fraud. The government spent years and billions of dollars pursued. Major bank paid hundreds of billions in settlements. It was slow and imperfect, but the accountability was real. After 9 by 11, the United States redesigned its entire national security architecture in less than 2 years. New agencies were created, billions were spent. The political will was absolute. But after the largest theft from the American government in the history, $100 billion stolen from a fraud fund designed for the most vulnerable workers in the country. The response has been in the historical terms modest, because here is the uncomfortable truth that runs underneath everything in the history. The people who were robbed were not Wall Street banks, they were not defense contractors, they were not institutions with lobbyists and lawyers and accessible to congressional offices. They were waitresses, rideshare drivers, freelancers, hotel workers, the people who clean offices and serve food and drive trucks and make their country function, and who for a few months in 2020 needed the government to function for them in return. The system failed them. When the money was stolen, it was failed them against when their claims were frozen. It failed that them a third time when the investigations was underfunded, and it continues to fail them now because the system that allowed this to happen has still not been fundamentally fixed. A 2023 audit by the Government Accountability Office found that multiple states are still running unemployment infrastructure vulnerable to the same categories of fraud that enabled the COVID after theft. Not hypothetically vulnerable, actually vulnerable right now, which means that when the next crisis comes, and the crisis will come, the conditions for this to happen again are still in place. $100 billion gone. Most of those responsible free. Most of the victims never made whole, and the system essentially unchanged. I know how easy to hear this and story like this and feel nothing but a helplessness. The number is too big. The crime is too complex. The criminal are too far away. The government is too slow. It all feels like something that just happens above and beyond anything ordinary people can influence. But I want to push back on the feeling, because the reason this story doesn't get sustained national attention it deserves. It is not because Americans don't care. It is because not enough Americans know. Every person who watches this video and shares it with one another person is doing something real. Every person who contacts their congressional representative and asks why the COVID fraud task forces are being defunded is doing something real. Every person who votes in local and state elections, specifically paying attention to which candidates the government accountability seriously, that is real. Now I want to hear from you, and I have a question. The federal government knew in writing before PUA launched that the lose and verification requires very a major fraud risk. They launched the program anyway. The $100 billion was stolen. No senior officials has faced criminal charges. Should they? Leave your answer below and tell me, do you think this will ever truly be investigated, or is this just how America works now? Hit that like button if the history story made you angry. Subscribe if you want to stay informed, and share this, because the people in the food lines in 2020 deserves better. They still do. Thank you. Thank you very much for watching, and share your opinion sincerely in the comments.